In a galaxy filled with different species, the Velkarians were feared. Their empire spread over many star systems, and they were known for their advanced technology. They had never met a challenge they couldn't crush, and their arrogance grew with every victory. So, when they heard about a new species called humans, they didn't think much of it. Humans were new to the larger galaxy, only recently discovering how to travel between the stars. To the Velkarians, they seemed like children playing with toys. The humans had built a few ships and settled on a few planets, but compared to the Velkarians, they looked small and weak. The Velkarians decided to deal with them quickly. A meeting was arranged. The Velkarians wanted to show their strength, make the humans nervous, and get them to agree to Velkarian rules. The meeting took place on a neutral planet called Korintar, known for hosting diplomatic talks between different species. The Velkarians were sure this would be easy. They had brought along some of their best diplomats and soldiers to show off their power. Captain Elias Reed was chosen to represent the humans. He was a calm, experienced leader, known for his intelligence and quick thinking. As his ship landed on Korintar, he thought about what he knew of the Velkarians. They were strong, yes, but also proud and overconfident. He knew they saw humans as weak, but Reed had a plan. He wasn't here to be scared or pushed around. The Velkarian team was led by Commander Zelgar, a tall, imposing figure with sharp, dark eyes and skin like silver metal. Zelgar was used to people fearing him. As he watched the human ship land, he smirked. "This will be quick," he said to his second-in-command. "We'll show them who's in charge." When Captain Reed and his team stepped off the ship, they were greeted by the sight of towering Velkarian soldiers, all in shining armor, holding weapons that looked like they could destroy entire cities. The Velkarians stood tall, confident in their superiority. Reed, however, remained calm, walking forward with steady steps. His team followed him, all showing the same calmness. Zelgar approached Reed, a smug smile on his face. "Welcome, human. You are here to understand your place in this galaxy," he said. His voice was cold, and there was no hint of friendliness. Reed didn't flinch. He looked Zelgar in the eyes, his expression unreadable. "Thank you for the invitation," Reed said politely. "We're here to talk about cooperation, not submission." Zelgar laughed, a sound that echoed in the large meeting hall. "Cooperation? You misunderstand. You are here to agree to our terms. You will follow Velkarian rules, or there will be consequences." Reed remained calm, but his eyes narrowed slightly. He knew the Velkarians would try to push them, but he was ready. "What kind of consequences are we talking about?" he asked, his tone still polite but with an edge. Zelgar's smile faded. He wasn't used to being questioned like this. "We will show you our might. If you resist, we will crush you. Your people may think they are strong, but they are nothing compared to us. Our fleets, our weapons, our soldiers, we have destroyed entire civilizations before. You will be no different." Reed listened carefully. He could see the arrogance in Zelgar's eyes, the way he spoke as if this was already decided. The Velkarians clearly believed they had all the power here. Reed, however, knew something Zelgar didn't. "The humans aren't looking for a fight," Reed said, still calm. "But we won't be bullied either. I would advise you not to underestimate us." Zelgar's face twisted in amusement. "Underestimate? You think you're a match for us?" He turned to his soldiers, who all grinned. "We have seen your ships, your technology. It's primitive. You don't stand a chance." Reed took a deep breath. He had hoped the Velkarians would be open to a more peaceful discussion, but their arrogance was too strong. They didn't see humans as equals. In fact, they didn't even see them as a threat. This wasn't going to be a simple talk. "I'm giving you a friendly warning," Reed said, his voice steady but serious. "Don't make the mistake of thinking we're weak. If you push us, you won't like the result." Zelgar was done listening. He stepped closer to Reed, his eyes blazing with anger. "Enough of this! We will give you one last chance. Accept our terms, or we will show you what Velkarians are capable of." Reed met Zelgar's gaze without blinking. "Do what you must," he said, "but don't say I didn't warn you." For a moment, the hall was silent. The tension in the air was thick. Zelgar's soldiers gripped their weapons, ready for a fight. But Reed didn't move. He stood tall, unafraid. Zelgar turned away with a snarl. "You'll regret this, human. You'll see the power of the Velkarian Empire soon enough." Reed watched as the Velcarians left the hall. His team stood behind him, still calm and composed. "Are you sure this was the right move, Captain?" one of his team members asked quietly. Reed nodded. They needed to hear it. Let's hope they listen before it's too late. As Reed and his team returned to their ship, he couldn't help but think about what was coming next. The Velcarians were powerful, yes, but humans had faced powerful enemies before, and they had a way of surprising those who underestimated them. The meeting had ended, but the real challenge was just beginning. After the tense meeting on Corintar, Captain Elias Reed returned to his ship with a sense of urgency. He knew the Velcarians were dangerous, not because of their weapons or numbers, but because of their arrogance. They believed they could crush anyone who stood in their way, and Reed had seen that look in their eyes. They weren't going to let this go easily. As his ship soared back into space, Reed sat in the command chair, watching the stars drift by. His crew was quiet, focused, and ready for what was coming. They knew the Velcarians wouldn't take the humans' warning seriously. In fact, Reed was certain they were already preparing their fleet to attack. "Captain, what's the plan?" asked Lieutenant Sarah Quinn, his second-in-command. She stood beside him, arms folded, her face calm but her eyes sharp. Like Reed, she knew the gravity of the situation. "The Velcarians think they can intimidate us," Reed said, his voice steady. "They think we're weaker than them, but they've made a mistake. They don't know what humans are capable of when pushed." Sarah nodded. "Do you think they'll attack us soon?" Reed glanced at the holographic map of the galaxy projected in front of him. The Velcarian Empire was massive, covering hundreds of star systems. It was only a matter of time before they made their move. "Yes," he replied. "It won't be long. They'll want to send a message, and they'll do it with force." Sarah frowned. "Should we warn Earth?" Reed shook his head. "Earth already knows. We've been preparing for this ever since we made contact with other species. The Velcarians might think we're unprepared, but they're wrong. We've been preparing for years. Back on the Velcarian homeworld, Commander Zelgar was furious. The human captain had dared to challenge him, to refuse the terms of the mighty Velcarian Empire. It was an insult he would not tolerate. "Prepare the fleet," Zelgar commanded, his voice echoing through the war room. Velcarian soldiers and officers scrambled to follow his orders. "We'll show these humans what real power looks like." Zelgar stood before a massive display of the Velcarian fleet. Thousands of ships, each one equipped with the most advanced weapons in the galaxy. The Velcarians had never lost a battle, and Zelgar was confident this would be no different. "They think they can stand up to us?" Zelgar muttered to himself. "We'll crush them before they even have a chance to fight." The Velcarians had studied human technology. They knew that humans had only recently started building large ships and powerful weapons. To Zelgar, it was clear that humans were far behind the Velcarians in terms of military power. This battle, he thought, would be over quickly. Meanwhile, on the human side, preparations were quietly underway. Unlike the Velcarians, who flaunted their power, humans believed in being cautious. They didn't show all their cards at once. Captain Reed's warning to the Velcarians had been genuine, but he knew they wouldn't listen. That's why humanity had been ready for this day, even if the Velcarians didn't know it yet. In human-controlled space, fleets were gathering. Thousands of ships, hidden deep within strategic locations, were being mobilized. Human engineers were fine-tuning advanced weapons systems, and military leaders were finalizing their plans. The atmosphere was calm, almost eerie. There was no panic, no fear, just quiet determination. On Earth, President Carla Winters received the latest updates from her top advisors. She had been briefed on the meeting with the Velcarians, and though she knew war was likely, she remained composed. "How soon do we expect the Velcarians to move?" President Winters asked General Davis, the head of the human military forces. "Within the next 72 hours, Madam President," General Davis replied. "They'll likely send a small fleet at first to test us. But we're ready." President Winters nodded. "Good. Make sure all of our forces are on standby. If the Velcarians want to pick a fight, they'll soon learn what they've started." Back on Reed's ship, the crew was also preparing. The ship was quiet, but the tension was building. Everyone knew what was coming, but no one showed fear. Humans had always thrived under pressure, and this was no different. Reed walked through the ship's corridors, checking in with his crew. He stopped by the engineering bay where Chief Engineer Marcus Lee was hard at work. "Everything running smoothly, Marcus?" Reed asked. Marcus wiped his hands on a rag and nodded. "We're good to go, Captain. The ship's systems are operating at full capacity. If the Valkyrians show up, we'll be ready." Reed smiled slightly. "Good. I'm counting on you to keep this ship running." As Reed continued his rounds, he couldn't help but think about the Valkyrians. They were so sure of themselves, so convinced that their technology made them unbeatable. But Reed knew something they didn't. Humans had faced impossible odds before, and they had always found a way to win. The Valkyrians were about to learn that underestimating humanity was a grave mistake. In the Valkyrian war room, Zelgar's fleet was nearly ready. "Send the first wave," Zelgar ordered. "Let's show these humans the power of the Valkyrian Empire." As the Valkyrian ships launched into space, racing toward human territory, Zelgar felt a surge of confidence. This battle would be over quickly, and the humans would be forced to bow to Valkyrian rule. But on the other side of the galaxy, Captain Reed and his crew were waiting. The calm before the storm was almost over, and soon the Valkyrians would learn the true meaning of human strength. The Valkyrian fleet was massive. Hundreds of ships, sleek and deadly, sped through space like a storm of metal. At the front of the formation was Commander Zelgar, sitting comfortably in his command chair aboard the Valkyrian flagship. His sharp eyes watched the display screens, which showed the rapidly approaching human-controlled space. "They think they can stand against us," Zelgar muttered to himself, almost amused by the idea. He had fought many battles in his career, but this one seemed different. To him, it felt like the humans had no idea what they were up against. Zelgar saw it as his duty to remind them of their place in the galaxy. His fleet moved with precision, the result of years of strict Valkyrian discipline. Every ship was armed with advanced weapons that could turn planets into dust. Zelgar wasn't planning on destroying Earth just yet. No, this first wave was meant to scare the humans, to show them the power of the Valkyrians, and to make them realize resistance was hopeless. "We'll send a message," Zelgar said to his second-in-command, Lieutenant Maros. "A show of force that will make the humans think twice about defying us again." Maros nodded, a grim smile on his face. They won't know what hit them. As the Valkyrian fleet entered human space, the alarms on Captain Reed's ship blared to life. The crew quickly sprang into action, each person moving with purpose. They had been expecting this. "Captain, the Valkyrian fleet has crossed the border into our space," Lieutenant Sarah Quinn reported, her voice calm but firm. She stood at Reed's side, her eyes scanning the data on her screen. "They'll be in range in less than 15 minutes. Reed nodded, his face unreadable. He had been waiting for this moment, and now it was here. "Tell the fleet to hold their positions," he ordered. "We don't want to make the first move." Sarah relayed the command, and Reed watched as the holographic display of the galaxy lit up with human ships, all waiting in strategic positions. Unlike the Valkyrians, who had charged in full of confidence, the human fleet was holding back, watching and waiting. "They're going to try and scare us," Reed said quietly. "They want us to panic, to think we can't win." Sarah glanced at him. "And what's the plan, Captain?" Reed smiled slightly. "Let them show off. Then we'll show them what overkill really means." The Valkyrian fleet came into view on the human sensors, and it was an impressive sight. Hundreds of ships, all in perfect formation, their weapons gleaming in the darkness of space. The Valkyrians had brought their most powerful vessels, and it was clear they were ready for war. "Captain, they're hailing us," Sarah said. "Put them through," Reed replied. Zelgar's face appeared on the main screen, his expression smug and full of confidence. "Captain Reed," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance, "I see you've chosen to stay and watch the end of your people." Reed remained calm. "We're not going anywhere, Commander Zelgar," he said, his tone steady. "But I think you've misjudged us." Zelgar's smile widened. "Have I? Look at my fleet, Captain. We could destroy you with a single strike. Your ships are nothing compared to ours. This is your last chance to surrender." Reed leaned forward slightly. "We won't surrender, Commander. But if you want to fire the first shot, go ahead." Zelgar's eyes narrowed. "You're making a mistake, human. We will show you no mercy. The transmission ended and the Valkyrian ships began to power up their weapons. On the human side, the fleet remained still, watching as the Valkyrians prepared to fire. "They're charging their main cannons," Sarah said, her fingers moving across the controls. Reed stood up, his eyes fixed on the holographic map. "Let them fire," he said. "They think this will scare us." But they're wrong. Suddenly, the Valkyrian ships unleashed a barrage of energy blasts. The sky lit up with bright flashes as the deadly beams of energy shot toward the human fleet. It was an overwhelming display of power, and to anyone watching, it would have looked like the end. But Reed didn't flinch. "Shields up," he ordered calmly. The human ships activated their shields, and the energy blasts hit them with a thunderous crash. But instead of being destroyed, the human ships held firm. The shields absorbed the damage, flickering for a moment before stabilizing. The Valkyrians were expecting their shots to break through, but they hadn't anticipated the strength of the human defenses. Zelgar watched in disbelief as the human ships remained unharmed. "How is this possible?" Zelgar growled. "Our weapons should have torn them apart." Reed's eyes gleamed with determination. "Now," he said quietly, "it's our turn." The human fleet, which had been silent up until now, suddenly came to life. Weapons powered up and targeting systems locked onto the Valkyrian ships. But instead of a small counterattack, the humans unleashed everything they had. Missiles, energy beams, plasma cannons, all fired at once in a massive wave of destruction. The Valkyrians were caught off guard. They had expected resistance, but nothing like this. Human technology wasn't as primitive as they thought. In fact, it was far more advanced than they had ever imagined. Explosions rocked the Valkyrian fleet as their ships were hit by the full force of the human attack. One by one, Valkyrian vessels were torn apart, their shields unable to withstand the sheer volume of firepower. Zelgar's smug confidence vanished as he watched his fleet being ripped to pieces. This can't be!" Zelgar shouted, his voice filled with shock and disbelief. They're destroying us." On Reed's ship, the crew watched as the Valkyrian ships exploded, one after another. The battle had turned, and it was clear who the real power was in this fight. Reed stood tall, his face calm but focused. "That," he said quietly, "is what humans call overkill." The battlefield in space had turned into a graveyard of Valkyrian ships. Broken hulls, twisted metal, and flickering lights floated aimlessly in the void, where only moments ago the Valkyrian fleet had roared with confidence. Now, silence replaced the once mighty war cries. On his flagship, Commander Zelgar could hardly believe what was happening. His fleet, the pride of the Valkyrian Empire, had been reduced to rubble in a matter of minutes. He had underestimated the humans. They weren't just resisting, they were wiping out his forces with brutal efficiency. "They're tearing us apart," Lieutenant Marrow screamed, panic overtaking his usually calm demeanor. "We can't stop them!" Zelgar clenched his fists, anger boiling in his chest. "How could this be possible?" he muttered. Their technology was supposed to be inferior, yet the reality before him couldn't be denied. The humans had unleashed a torrent of firepower unlike anything Zelgar had ever seen. Their ships, which once seemed small and weak, were now devastating the battlefield with advanced weapons that tore through Valkyrian defenses as if they were paper. On Captain Reed's ship, the mood was calm, but there was a quiet sense of satisfaction. The Valkyrians had pushed humanity, and humanity had responded with overwhelming force. "They never saw this coming," Lieutenant Sarah Quinn said, watching the aftermath on the display screen. "They thought they could bully us, but they didn't realize what we were capable of." Reed nodded, his expression serious. "This is what happens when you underestimate humans. They thought we were weak, that they could scare us into surrendering. But humans don't break that easily. Captain, should we press the attack?" Sarah asked. Reed thought for a moment, his eyes scanning the map of the battlefield. The Valkyrian fleet was in shambles, but a few ships still remained, trying to regroup. Zelgar's flagship was among them. "We're not done yet," Reed said. "Target their command ship. We need to send a clear message." Back on the Valkyrian flagship, Zelgar struggled to regain control. "Order the remaining ships to form a defensive line," he barked. "We'll make our stand here." Marrows hesitated. "Commander, we've already lost most of the fleet." Our defenses are— Do as I say. Zelgar interrupted, his eyes burning with fury. We are Velcarians. We do not retreat. The remaining Velcarian ships struggled to regroup, but the damage was too severe. Their ships were crippled, their weapons failing, and their shields flickering. The human fleet, on the other hand, was still fully operational, preparing for the next phase of their assault. Reed's ship moved into position, and the weapons systems locked onto Zelgar's flagship. Fire! Reed ordered, his voice calm but firm. A barrage of energy beams and missiles shot through the void, slamming into the Velcarian command ship. The shields buckled under the sheer force of the attack, and explosions rippled across the hull. Inside the command center, alarms blared and sparks flew from damaged consoles. Zelgar grabbed onto the edge of his chair as the ship shook violently. "We can't take much more of this!" Maros shouted, fear in his voice. "Our shields are failing." Zelgar refused to accept defeat. "We can't lose to these humans!" he roared. "We are the Velcarian Empire." But even as he spoke, the ship shuddered again, another explosion tearing through the lower decks. It was only a matter of time before the entire vessel would break apart. On Reed's ship, the crew watched as the Velcarian flagship began to fall apart. The once imposing vessel, which had been a symbol of Velcarian power, was now a burning wreck. "They're finished," Sarah said quietly. "We've won." Reed nodded, but there was no joy in his eyes. "It's not about winning," he said. "It's about survival. The Velcarians came here thinking they could crush us. We had to show them that we won't be bullied." As the Velcarian flagship continued to break apart, Zelgar knew the battle was lost. His empire's greatest fleet had been destroyed, and there was nothing left for him to do. But even in defeat, he refused to surrender. "Prepare the self-destruct sequence," Zelgar ordered through gritted teeth. Maros stared at him in shock. "Commander, that will kill us all!" Zelgar's eyes blazed with madness. "If we can't win, then we'll take as many of them with us as we can." But before Maros could follow the order, the ship was hit by one final blast. The entire vessel shook violently, and the command center filled with smoke and fire. Zelgar's grip on his chair loosened as the ship's systems failed around him. This can't be how it ends," Zelgar muttered, his voice barely a whisper as the light faded from his eyes. And with that, the Velcarian flagship exploded, sending a shockwave through space. The remaining Velcarian ships, now leaderless and hopelessly outgunned, began to retreat. On Reed's ship, the crew watched the explosion in silence. The battle was over, and humanity had emerged victorious. "They're retreating," Sarah said, relief in her voice. "The Velcarians are falling back." Reed stood up from his chair, his face calm but resolute. "Let them go. They've learned their lesson. We don't need to destroy them all." As the human fleet pulled back, leaving the broken remains of the Velcarian fleet behind, Reed couldn't help but think about the future. The Velcarians wouldn't forget this defeat, and neither would the rest of the galaxy. The message had been sent loud and clear. Humanity wasn't to be underestimated. "We've shown them what we're capable of," Reed said quietly. "Now the galaxy knows what humans call overkill." The Velcarian fleet was gone. All that remained of their once mighty armada were burning fragments of metal drifting aimlessly through the cold darkness of space. The human fleet, victorious but battered, floated in silence, their weapons now quiet after the intense battle. On the command bridge of his ship, Captain Reed stared at the holographic display. The battle had been won, but there was no sense of celebration among the crew. The room was eerily silent, the weight of what had just happened hanging heavily over them all. "We did it," Lieutenant Sarah Quinn said, breaking the silence. She stood beside Reed, her voice filled with both relief and exhaustion. "The Velcarians are retreating. We've won." Reed nodded, his face expressionless. "Yes, we've won," he repeated, but there was no triumph in his tone. He could see the debris of Velcarian ships still glowing from the battle's heat, and it reminded him of the high cost of this victory. The display showed the human fleet, still intact but not untouched. Several ships had suffered heavy damage, their hulls scarred from the intense firefight. While the humans had emerged victorious, it wasn't without sacrifice. Reed couldn't help but think about the lives lost today on both sides. How many of our people did we lose? Reed asked, his voice low. Sarah checked the data on her console, her expression turning grim. 17 ships destroyed, dozens damaged. Casualties? Thousands. The numbers hit Reed hard. Thousands of lives gone in a matter of hours. It was a victory, yes, but the cost was far too high for him to feel any sense of pride. Contact the fleet, Reed said after a long pause. I want reports from all ships. Prioritize rescue operations. We need to recover as many survivors as possible. Sarah nodded and quickly relayed the orders. The human fleet began coordinating rescue efforts, searching the wreckage for any signs of life. It was a slow, grim task, but it had to be done. As Reed watched the rescue ships moving through the debris, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed today. This wasn't just another battle. This was something bigger. The Valkyrians had come to crush humanity, to show their superiority, but in their arrogance they had underestimated what humans were capable of. Reed knew that the rest of the galaxy would hear about this battle. The message had been sent, humanity wasn't weak, and they wouldn't be pushed around. But Reed also knew that this wasn't the end. The Valkyrians would regroup and others might come after them. Today had proven that humanity could stand its ground, but the price of that defiance was high. As the crew worked tirelessly around him, Reed took a moment to reflect. He hadn't wanted this war, but now that it was here, he knew there was no turning back. The Valkyrians had made their move and humanity had responded with overkill. But what would come next? Sarah broke his thoughts once again. Captain, we're receiving a transmission from Earth. It's from the President. Reed took a deep breath. He knew this conversation was inevitable. Put it through. The holographic display shifted, and the face of President Gray appeared. Her expression was serious, but there was a hint of relief in her eyes. Captain Reed, President Gray began, her voice steady. I've just received the battle reports. It seems we owe you and your fleet a great deal of thanks. Reed straightened up, his tone respectful. We did what we had to, Madam President. The Valkyrians weren't giving us any choice. Gray nodded. I understand. And from what I can see, you didn't just defend us. You sent a message to the entire galaxy. This victory will be remembered for a long time. Reed's expression remained somber. Yes, but at what cost? We've lost thousands of lives. Families will be mourning today. The President's face softened. I know, Captain, and we will honor every one of those brave souls. But we also need to remember that this victory has ensured humanity's survival. The Valkyrians won't underestimate us again. Reed glanced at the debris field once more. No, they won't. But they'll be back or someone else will. We've shown the galaxy what humans can do. But we've also put a target on our backs. Gray paused for a moment, considering his words. That may be true, but for now the Valkyrians are in retreat. We'll use this time to rebuild, to prepare for whatever comes next. And we'll be ready, thanks to people like you and your crew. Reed appreciated the sentiment, but the weight of the battle still pressed down on him. Thank you, Madam President. We'll be ready. The transmission ended, and the command bridge returned to its quiet state. Reed leaned back in his chair, feeling the exhaustion of the battle settle in. The fight was over, but the war wasn't finished. Not yet. The crew continued their rescue operations, pulling survivors from the wreckage and tending to the wounded. It was a reminder that even in victory, there were still consequences, still losses to bear. As the last of the Valkyrian ships disappeared from their sensors, fleeing into the darkness of space, Reed allowed himself a moment of reflection. The Valkyrians had come to destroy them, but they had underestimated the will of humanity. In the end, it wasn't just about survival. It was about sending a message. The galaxy had seen what humans could do when pushed to the brink. They had seen the sheer force, the determination, the overkill that humanity was capable of. And now, as the dust settled and the human fleet regrouped, Reed knew that the galaxy would never forget this day.